these systems, and we are biased. To be biased is to be human. We started out being biased because this provides us with shortcuts. Having this extra information in the back of our minds helps us avoid risk and helps us to simplify a problem. And bias isn't inherently bad, but we do tend to misapply it in some situations. And it can be implicit. We may not even be aware that we're biased in many situations. Also, we find that sometimes bias isn't in sync with our conscious beliefs. So we may notice that we immediately upon seeing someone, we may have an assumption about them. And then we realize, wait, that's not true. That is the disconnect between our biases and our consciousness. And we can work through that. We can manage and change our biases, especially once we realize that they're there, we can address them. And the best way to do this is by having conversations and making sure that those are non-threatening, having productive conversations about the hard topics and talking through what those biases are and how we can move past them. And these biases come from our experiences, the social class we grew up in, perhaps the social class we've moved into. It might be because of resource availability or our education, race, gender, sexuality, culture, theology, tradition. All of these aspects of our lives build up into the biases that we have. And so many of these, again, we aren't necessarily aware of until we see a different way of doing things. And that's when it may become more apparent that we have a bias. And because of this, all systems will have some sort of bias. The idea of complete objectivity is misleading and is dangerous. Bias can have purpose and can be helpful. So an example I like to use is hospital systems. Sometimes a hospital will treat a particular disease more aggressively than another hospital system. And if you're building a diagnosis or a treatment system for them, you would want the bias of the system to match the hospital. You would want it to have that bias so that it gave the right diagnosis or the right treatment. And the goal of any system should be to reduce unintended or harmful biases. We want to avoid those kind of biases, even as we know the system will have some bias. So the best way to do this is building diverse, talented, and multidisciplinary teams. So bringing people together that have different skill sets, different problem framing approaches, and having different areas of knowledge. So this also means, of course, gender, race, and cultural differences, but also education. So we don't want a team of people from all the same education. We don't want people who have all had the same professors because they're more likely to think the same way about problems. And we want people with different experiences, different thinking processes, and different skill sets. So having, all the developers, the machine learning experts, people from a variety of different skills and experiences coming together. And of course, age, disability, and health status as well. There are many different ways diversity can be represented, and we want all of that in these teams because this group is going to work better when they have those differences. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The other key piece here is having representatively diverse leadership, and this will help improve retention. So if you recruit a lot of diverse people, but you don't have that leadership in place, often those people won't stick around. They won't see a path forward. They won't see leadership that reflects their themselves. They won't see people who understand their experiences in those leadership positions, and then they'll leave. So by having those individuals in place ahead of time, that will be able to encourage retention, and people will stick around longer, which is a good thing. So this is not about lowering the bar, but rather extending it. This is really trying to bring together this diverse team because great minds do think differently, and that's what we want. We want people who are thinking differently about problems, thinking creatively, bringing their experiences to bear on the problems that we're trying to solve. And the reason for this also is that there is just high value in diverse teams beyond the benefits of just bringing together different people. We have found, the study done by the Harvard Business Review has found anyway, that diverse teams focus more on facts, they process facts more carefully, and they're more innovative. So they become more aware of their own potential biases and their entrenched ways of thinking that could otherwise blind them to key information and even lead them to make errors in decision-making processes. So by being an individual who is different from the other individuals in the team, they realize how different they are all thinking, and they're more aware of that. And they bring that knowledge to bear on the work that they're doing. So again, these teams become more innovative and do better work because they're different from each other. So AI does have great potential, but we have to develop it with caution. So in the future, AIs may become trusted to substitute human cognition and abilities. I think we're far, far from that at this point. And humans really, in the meantime, must continue to be responsible for situations that involve a person's life. So for example, the use of force or their quality of life, their health, their reputation. AI is going to ensure appropriate human judgment, but it can't replace it. And that's from the Defense Innovation Board that advises the Department of Defense. There are important decisions that we just need to make sure humans are approving or able to change after the fact, if not before the fact. And that's going to be something that we need to maintain throughout probably at least the next 10 years, if not well beyond that. The first step to making sure we can implement these ethics are picking some technical ethics. And there are lots of different organizations who are presenting them at this point. The ACM has a set of technical ethics, AI Now Institute, all these different corporations also are releasing different codes of ethics. The Montreal Declaration for Responsible AI is the one that I tend to recommend people use because it's very broad. And all of these technical ethics will help teams to harmonize their cultural variation. So when you bring that diverse group together, they may have different ideas of what ethics are. You want them to all coalesce around one set of technical ethics. And this will also help to balance the pace of change. We often want to release very quickly. There's a lot of industry pressure to do that, and that isn't a bad thing. However, we do need to take the time to think through the implications. And by creating this space, by having technical ethics, we're actually giving explicit permission to the team to really consider and question the breadth of those implications and to really take the time to think through how to do this work and do it right. So that set of ethics I was talking about, the Montreal Declaration, has all of these areas. They may not all be relevant for your space, but it allows you to use this as a framework to begin to move forward. So you can find what works and then use that. And as your organization matures, you may find that you need a different set. You may find that you need a subset. But starting with something, I think, is easier than trying to build from scratch. So taking that diverse, inclusive leadership, those diverse multidisciplinary teams, and that shared set of tech ethics, we can then move forward and start making and designing trustworthy AI. Are there any relevant questions I should address at this point? I see little indications.
So one question that came up was, what about cultural biases?
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of the biases. And that's why it's important to have teams coalescing around a set of technical ethics, because that will account for those cultural biases. And across, international audiences. So if you're designing work that is going to be implemented in different cultures itself, that's a different subject entirely. And in that situation, you would want to have culturally relevant ethics for each implementation. Although as an organization, you may decide that your cultural ethics, that the organization's ethics may override the culture if you determine that the culture that you're putting your software into is not something that you want to align with. So for example, freedom of speech. In some cultures that may not be a respected ideal, and you may decide that that is an ideal that you're, or an ethic that you're going to support. And so there are different reasons, and this is complex. This is what this is all about, is having these conversations and deciding what's going to be right for your situation, what's going to be right for the work that you're doing.
Great.
Hi, Carol. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, whoever's going to ask the question.
Oh, sorry. There's a lag. So then I thought it was muted and then I came in. My name is Diana. I work in the AI space. And this is a question I kind of forward to all teams, and anyone that can comment on this, including Carol, would be fantastic. So oftentimes when I'm working with teams or working with different companies, they are in a their AI maturity is very much in its infancy. And when they're developing ML and AI products, they're relying a lot on public data sets that are available, whether through like TensorFlow frameworks, just to get the ball going. And because it's a public data set, of course, there's going to be implicit biases that are within those data sets. From a design perspective and research perspective, how do you help people start to kind of facilitate that conversation for the products that they're developing on, one, getting more data to correct biases, especially ones that come from public data sets? Or how do you work with companies that maybe have to work with a smaller sample size?
Yeah, so there are techniques within AI to work with smaller data sets. So that would definitely be preferable to using any of the data sets that are publicly available that have known negative biases. So for example, in image sets, we know now that almost all of the available data sets are primarily of lighter skinned individuals and primarily male, which means that if you use a facial recognition system on that data set, you are going to be much less likely to be able to recognize a dark-skinned woman, for example. She will simply not be recognized accurately by that system, and therefore that's a bad data set. So one option is to take that open source data set and edit it, and really do the work of curation to make it a better set. That's one option, not a great option. Another idea is to actually make your own data set, also very time consuming and expensive. Another option is to use one of those other AI methods that uses less data. And again, none of these are great options. Part of the big problem with AI systems is the lack of data. And then I would question if the work that they're doing is really going to improve the situation or not. If there's not a good data set, then it's unlikely they'll be able to create a good solution. So it's a big problem in the AI community in general.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So Carol, I want to make sure that you have time to get through the rest of your talk. So I'll collect the questions and ask them at the end if that works for everybody.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, I will keep going. So the big thing here is for us to activate curiosity in the teams that we're working with. And there are a lot of different activities we can do. In addition to the regular UX type activities, there are a variety of newer activities that we can be doing. One of those is abusability testing, which has been popularized by Dan Brown. And this is the idea of really, tearing apart a system and thinking about how could this be abused, and having users or proxies to really try to abuse the system. Another method that I really like is the Black Mirror episodes. This was inspired by the British dystopian sci-fi series. If you have not yet seen it, I highly recommend it. It's depressing, but also very enlightening as far as how systems can be really abused and unethically made. Really good show. And I will be talking more about Black Mirror episodes in a few minutes. Another activity you can do is flip it to test it. This is where you simply change the race or the gender or whatever potential levers you have, for example, in a persona or something along those lines, a scenario, and you change them to see if the assumptions that you're making are still accurate, if they still hold water, for lack of a better analogy there. And this will enable you to really make sure that you are not being overly biased in your work. And finally, the implicit association test. This is an online test that Harvard has put together, and it will help you to identify the biases that you're not aware of, the implicit associations that you are making about other individuals. It's really helpful, and if you take it as a team, you can share those if you're in a good situation with your team. All of these are about speculating about the system misuse and abuse, and understanding the potential unwanted and unintended consequences. So how do we get there? That's what I'm going to talk through next, is really taking that set of ethics and moving through to make trustable ethical AI. This is the work that I've been talking about, these conversations. So having the team work together to really talk through about what they value, who could be hurt, what lines won't the AI system cross, how are we shifting power? That's a conversation that I think is really helpful. And how we track our progress, how will we know that we are being successful? And this is really difficult, particularly for people who just haven't had those types of conversations in the past, but that's why it's even more important to have it with the entire team. It's uncomfortable work, but we need to get used to being uncomfortable with this work. Laura Kalbeck talks about this, that ethical design is not superficial. We really need to have these hard conversations. And if we're not asking the tough questions, who do we think will? Who's going to be the one who protects the people using these systems? Who's going to be the one who stands up and says, this isn't right, we shouldn't be doing this work? We need to be there doing that. I know that's a heavy burden, but it is also our job as the user experience individuals in the room. So the work that can be done through a checklist, for example, I've developed this checklist that you can pair with your technical ethics. So if you have ethics that have very vague statements such as do no harm, and you need to bridge the gap between that and the reality of building the system, this can help you to start to query the team and to query the ethics to see how you can actually implement them. It will help you to reduce risk and unwanted bias and to support the inspection and mitigation planning that needs to be done to protect people. And this was developed through this framework that I'm working on. And there are 4 aspects of it: accountable to humans, cognizant of speculative risks and benefits, respectful and secure, and honest and usable. And I'll get into this through a scenario that I call WriteStaff. WriteStaff is an AI scheduling system, and the users would be store managers of fast food restaurants. So in this scenario, the goals of this particular system are to make faster staffing decisions and scheduling and reduce the bias of shift selection. In the past, managers in the stores have been giving their friends the better shifts or giving people who are easier to schedule the better shifts. And so there's been a significant increase in bias, and some individuals just never quite get enough hours, or they always get the bad shifts, et cetera. So this is going to help to reduce that bias. That's the goal for this. So how about accountable to humans? We want to ensure humans have ultimate control and they're able to monitor and control risk. And I talked about this a little bit earlier about being responsible for those final decisions, for decisions that really affect a person's quality of life, their health, their reputation, et cetera. And we want to make sure that humans are in control in the way that they can unplug the machines. Gray Booch talks about this in his TED Talk. But how do we really apply that in this situation? So the significant decisions that the system is going to make are going to need to be explained, they're going to need to be able to be overridden, and they're going to need to be appealable and reversible. So with WriteStaff, one thing to think about might be that the manager is able to reschedule people as needed. So if someone at the last minute needs a new schedule, if they have a doctor's appointment come up or something like that, the manager should be able to override the schedule that the system has created to adjust for that. That would be one example of how that applies here. The responsibilities should also be explicitly defined. So the AI system has some responsibilities and the humans are going to have some responsibilities. In this situation, it's the AI system and the manager in the store. And so we need to think about who's going to pick the employees to schedule. Is that the system or the manager? Who defines the shifts? How are we going to integrate new information? So sick time, if someone resigns, how is that going to be managed? So thinking through those can help us to define the different roles within the system. Abusability testing can be utilized here by looking at a situation, for example, where a feature is added to enable WriteStaff to turn off by itself. So having the activity of thinking through what the limits are of that. How could this be abused or misused? What are the implications? What are the risks? By thinking through all of this, we can start to determine how the system could potentially be abused in that scenario. We also need to be cognizant of speculative risks and benefits. So this is about identifying that full range of harmful and malicious use, as well as the good and beneficial use. Both are very important for these systems. And we want to also identify as much as possible any unwanted or unintended consequences. If we don't do this work, there will definitely be unintended and unwanted consequences.
Did anyone notice the audio went out?
Carol, you on mute?
Hey, Carol, I don't think we can hear you.
There was music. I think you have us on hold, maybe.
Let's see.
We also lost your video.
She
I
said
still see her video.
Situation more significantly.
Hey, Carol.
Yeah.
1 second, Carol. 1 second.
Okay.
We lost your audio.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay.
now.
All right. Yeah, it was acting out on my end too. Okay.
Great. Yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you
it
now.
still says
Perfect.
reconnecting, but I wasn't sure if that was just the system on my end. Okay, so we're good?
We are good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. So in the Black Mirror episodes, you can see a screenshot here or a picture at an IXDA Pittsburgh event where Anna Abovyan and Allison Cosby had created a workshop for us to actually go through this activity. And the
Uh-oh, guys.
The audio went out again.
Stand by. We might have lost Carol for just a moment. Let's see if we can get her back. There she is.
hi, I lost you guys.
You again.
I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, we will try this again.
You came back pretty fast, so that was good.
Yeah, that's good. Okay,
Perfect.
can you see my screen now?
We can see it.
Okay, and that's the screen I lost you on, right? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm seeing that. Okay, cool. All right, we'll keep going. It doesn't like Black Mirror episodes, apparently. Anyway, this work is really just identifying the severe consequences. And by doing that work, you're going to be able to account for less severe consequences. The important thing here is to really think about the perspectives of people who are in frequently marginalized groups. So for example, if you're working on a smart speaker or on a smart thermostat or on smart locks or anything in a home, one of the things you want to think about is domestic abuse situations. And if the person who has the control of those devices, if the person who has the passwords is the abuser and the abuser leaves the home, do they still have access to those devices in the home, and can they still abuse the person even though they're physically not even in the building anymore? That's something to think about with those types of devices, and that's something that the people who initially created many of those were not thinking about, because they probably did not have people in the group who had been stalked or who had been victims of domestic violence. And so by having a more diverse team, you're going to be able to think about Black Mirror episodes in particular much more creatively, much more speculatively, because of the experiences of the people on the team. We'll move on. Maybe. Okay, so with right staff, we can think about the system beginning to prioritize people with easier schedules, because that pattern is the easy pattern. And the managers would go ahead and approve these schedules, which unfortunately would reinforce bias. And then the people who were previously discriminated against would still be discriminated against. So knowing that this is a potential Black Mirror situation for this particular application, we can think about ways to mitigate against that, or prevent that completely, ideally. And by thinking through ahead of time, we're much more likely to be able to prevent it and to protect people from the goal of the system, which was to prevent that bias. We can also think about additional ways of thinking through these the worst case scenarios with this particular system. We can be speculative by creating communication and mitigation plans as well. So by planning for those unwanted consequences, by knowing ahead of time who can report these activities, is it the users, is it administrators, who can actually identify and then report bias or wrongdoing with the system? Who would they report that to? How would you turn the system off? Who would be notified, and what are the consequences? What happens once that system's turned off? What is the plan B? What else do they have? What's the backup system that people can rely on if the system is significant to the work that's being done? And respectful and secure is about values of humanity, ethics, equity, fairness, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion. And a lot of this is really about respecting privacy and data rights. So when we think about the system that we're building, how much data do we really need to collect? Do we really need a social security number, for example? Probably not. And if not, don't collect it. Any data that you collect is data that you need to protect and data that you're going to be responsible for. So reducing the amount of data that you're collecting about individuals will protect them. Making the system robust, valid, and reliable in all that those words mean, and providing understandable security are all parts of this aspect of the framework. And with regards to rights staff, we can think about who has visibility to the reasons for changing schedules. The individual may not want very many people to know about their doctor's appointment or whatever it is, and being able to protect their privacy is important. How is that information used, and how is the personally identifiable information, such as a social security number, protected? In this situation, we're doing scheduling. There probably is employee data connected to the system. How can we reduce the amount of data so that individuals cannot get more than is necessary out of that system? And the final aspect here is honest and usable. So valuing transparency with the goal of engendering trust and explicitly stating identity as an AI system. This is particularly important for smart speakers and situations where a human is communicating without seeing that it is a system, and being able to ensure that the human is aware when they are dealing with an AI system versus a human. With the rights staff situation, we want to think about fairness. So we want to show awareness of known and desirable bias, acknowledge those issues, and over-communicate on them as much as possible. In the rights staff scenario, the system is being built to reduce the known bias in the existing data. So we want to make it easy for people to report bias if they think it's occurring, or prevent it, ideally, as I mentioned already. And one more way that we can add to the system's quality is by rewarding team members for finding ethics bugs. Dr. Ayanna Howard proposed this idea on the Artificial Intelligence podcast with Lex Friedman. This is a great podcast if you're looking for another one. And she talks about how we can actually get the team more engaged by using rewards to get them involved in really looking for the problems ahead of time and helping them to understand the value of doing that work. So to wrap up, we are not perfect. The AI systems we build will not be perfect, but we do need to empower these diverse teams to have inclusive environments so that they feel that they can bring their full selves into the work. We need to adopt technical ethics and encourage deep conversations, and the checklist can help you to get started with that. And activate curiosity, to be speculative, to be imaginative, to really think through the potential good and bad that these systems can create, and think through how we're going to protect people and keep people safe. So I encourage you all to evangelize for human values, to be ethical, transparent, and fair, and make systems that are also accountable, de-risked, respectful, honest, and usable. And thank you. Here's my contact information if you'd like to continue the conversation. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol, for sharing your insight and your checklist with us. That was really great and eye-opening. Lots of claps from the group here. We did have several questions come in, so I'll ask a couple of those, and keep the questions coming in the chat as well, everybody. One question early on was, what do you think about the difference and or connection between bias in humans and society versus like the bias in the models?
Yeah, they're directly connected. The bias that evolves in AI systems, in any system that we create, is because of the bias in the humans that are creating the systems. So if we think about, as I was mentioning, the images, because the people creating those databases were likely either white or Asian males, because of the average person in industry, in this industry anyway, have been of those types, they are more likely to look at images of themselves and see people. They're also more likely to take pictures of themselves to add to that that collection. And so they're less likely to look for or even think about necessarily looking for Black women, for example. And so because of that, it builds into the data, and it's not necessarily because people are evil or they're trying to be cruel, although that can sometimes also be the case, but rather that they just simply are not thinking through all the individuals who could be harmed by the work they're doing. They're trying to do easy work. They're being, somewhat lazy and also just simply doing the best they can in some cases with the work. In other cases, the data is obviously biased. So we've seen this in racial profiling. We've seen this in particularly systems for mortgages, for example. They were trying to build systems that would be less biased against Latino and Black borrowers. And unfortunately, because they're using existing databases for mortgage loans, those mortgage loans specifically had been higher interest rates for those individuals. And so when they built an AI system on that data, it of course was biased against Latino and Black borrowers. And so they again were not given lower interest rates, rather they were given higher interest rates. And in fact, in some cases worse than previous, because the AI system had learned those patterns so well. So you didn't even have the difference in loan people, the people who actually would give the loans would probably be a little different. Now you had this one AI system who was treating everyone who was Latino or Black the same and worse. So it is all about the people building the system and the data that we've built and the data that we have claimed as historically accurate is accurate, but if it's racist, if it's sexist, if it's whatever, that will show up in the AI system you're building on top of it.
Yeah, those are some great points, and I love the Black Mirror analogy and thinking about like, well, how could this go poorly? How could this be an unintended consequence? So I appreciate that. There was a question in the chat about, have you noticed in your experience that research teams or teams that are focused on AI are doing more diverse hiring than maybe other projects that don't involve AI?
I think that's starting. I think we're starting to see more conversations around this. I don't think it's a trend yet. I do think that there are a lot of people who, are happy with the way things are, the status quo, and aren't interested in changing it. I also think people aren't being creative enough in looking for diverse people. They tend to look at the same schools, or they'll look at the same, recruiting networks that they've always used instead of branching out. And there are some great, additional organizations. There's the Black Engineers. I won't get the name of the organization right, but there are lots of organizations, and I can find those links and share them as well, where you can look to find more diverse people. They are out there. It is not a lack of people. It is rather a lack of creativity with recruiting.
Oh, I love that. There's no lack of people, just the recruiting efforts. So if you do the same thing, you'll get the same results.
Exactly.
So there was a question about, what large companies are on your radar as implementing or adopting technology ethics like really well, or on the flip side, what are some that you think are maybe not doing so great and could maybe use to attend your talk?
Yeah, who's doing well is really hard to see, actually, because many people are not sharing their work, which is fine. But so it's much harder to see who's being successful in that way. What we can rather see is how it impacts us on a day-to-day basis. So we can see the systems that make the news, which unfortunately are the ones that are not doing so well. So when we see companies that are using data sets that are biased, there's just a lot of that out there. There's also a lot of what Lisa Dixon, I think is her name, calls autonomous washing with regard to autonomous vehicles. So that is where we see the claims of self-driving being here, and we know that that is not the case, that humans still have to keep their hands on the wheels. They have to keep extremely vigilant with these systems, that they are not full self-driving in any way, shape, or form. Rather, they do pretty well for brief periods of time. But those are the types of things that I see that are ethically questionable minimally, and plenty of that going on around, as well as just generally claiming that AI will solve all the world's problems, which it can't. We have to do that work as humans. AI is not going to save us. We have to save ourselves.
Awesome. There are a couple of questions about some specifics related to the data, and one was an interesting one in the chat about, do you have any metaphors for data quality with AI research other than trash in, trash out?
Unfortunately, no. Yeah, what you get, what you put in, unfortunately, is what you get. Yeah, offhand anyway, I'm really bad at thinking about metaphors, but yeah, it's definitely what you see is what you get.
You
Yeah.
could try garbage in, garbage out if you
Yeah.
don't like trash. Just kidding.
Yeah. Right.
And then another one too is kind of came up of is there a standard for how much data is enough or not enough?
That is a great question, and there is no good answer. So there are lots of people doing work on, and I won't be able to. I'm certainly not a technical specialist in AI, but there are people working on trying to develop systems with extremely tiny data sets and extrapolate. And some of them are doing better than others. It really depends on the area that you're looking in. If it's an extremely narrow area, if you're looking at car colors. And you only have 4 car colors, you can probably get away with a tiny amount of data. If you're trying to create a system that's going to understand financial markets around the world, forget about it. You need a huge amount of data and probably multiple different models and multiple systems working together. And I mean, that is an extremely complex and potentially not even possible system that you're trying to build. So it really is dependent on what you're trying to do. Awesome. Usually it is, if you're doing a machine learning system, usually you're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands of pieces of data, and they need to be similar in their structure or similar in ways that the machine can understand. So it is not not even 100 is enough. It's got to be, a huge amount of data.
Yeah. And so I have one last question, and then I hope you'll stay on for Amanda's talk. And if any questions at the end are more general, we can do those at the end too. But I had a couple of questions come up of, what are you using for your captioning tool? That was so cool.
Oh yeah, that's just PowerPoint. Go figure.
What?
Yeah, Microsoft's always been really good about accessibility. I will say, I went to a conference 15 years ago, and they were there, and they've always been working on accessibility. And this is just PowerPoint out of the box.
Wow.
Yeah, you just turn it on, it comes on, and it works. It also probably catches all my little weird words in between, but it does work pretty well.
I love that. I guess I haven't used PowerPoint in a while, or I didn't trust that it would work. So that
right.
is a great tip.
Which is reasonable.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carol. And with that, we are going to switch over to Amanda Dorsey's topic tonight. So I'll go ahead and introduce Amanda to you all. I have had the pleasure of working with Amanda at Capital One for a few years now, and she is amazing. So she is the Director of Product Management at Capital One, where she leads the product team for auto finance sales business. She's passionate about building customer-backed products, reimagining the customer experience using AI, and building platform-oriented products that promote inner sourcing and reuse. In her free time, she also enjoys interior design, working out, and playing with her puppy, which I know she'll show you some pictures in just a minute. So with that, I'll hand it over to Amanda.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. And thanks, Carol. I learned a lot. I'm really glad that I got to hear your talk as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. So give me just 1 second. Okay. Can you guys see?
It looks like, yep, there it is.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I am going to be talking today about designing AI products. Here's a quick overview of what I'm going to cover. I'll just do a brief introduction of myself. As Lauren mentioned, you'll get to see some pictures of my puppy. And then I'll talk through what do we actually mean by AI, some lessons learned. So AI for me is something I really just started working on over the past 3 years or so here at Capital One. So I've had a lot of just personal lessons learned, as well as lessons that my team has learned as we've, started digging into this space. So I will share some of those with you guys. And I'm going to use a specific example of a product that we built internally at Capital One, which is called Smart Cues. I'll use that as I go through the different lessons learned to hopefully just illustrate how some of these lessons came to be. And then similar to Carol's talk, happy to take any questions at the end. So a little bit about me, some photos here to kind of illustrate my background. I grew up in upstate New York, Syracuse Orange fan. I went to college in St. Louis, Missouri at Washington University. And I actually joined Capital One out of school back in 2009. So I've spent my whole career with the company, several different roles. So I actually started as an analyst. My background is in analytics. I moved into product management about 5 years or so ago now. Capital One actually didn't have product when I first started at the company. And as we have really pivoted towards more of a tech-led financial services company, product management has become a pretty large job family, as has design. And so I moved into product as Capital One went through that journey. A few things personally, love traveling. You can see some photos of me, my husband. We also are in the process of building a house. So here's a picture of me in front of our new house, which we will hopefully be moving into in the end of this year. On the bottom right, you can see a car dealership. So I actually spent a number of years at Capital One working in our retail banking segment and came to auto finance about 3 years ago. It's a very different business, and I'll be talking a little bit about that industry as I discuss the Smart Keys example throughout the presentation. But it's a really fascinating business and one that is changing really rapidly. And lastly, of course, my puppy Roman. He does not look like this anymore. He's now over 60 pounds. It doesn't even look like a puppy, but he actually just turned 1 last week. So. Okay, so if you guys can just use the chat function, I would love to hear from you. Like, what does AI mean? If you were to, without Googling it, come up with your own 1-sentence description, what is AI? I would love to hear just a couple examples. Oops, I lost the file. Lauren, do you mind reading a couple of them if they come through? Because I think it's kicking me off the presentation when I try to go out of.
Oh yeah, no worries. I'll read a couple. So one is a tool for automation. Human digital twin. Oh, I like that one.
Ooh.
Automated computational decision-making based on, data sets. Supplementing people's abilities or doing certain things better than humans can. All right. A quickly thinking artificial brain that does things faster and better than humans. Okay, they're sensing a trend. Algorithms based on large data sets. Teaching models. Technology using data to make decisions. Non-organic intelligence. Let's see. Learning from previous data to make decisions.
Yeah, I think that last one is actually a really great definition. When I started working on AI, I think I had perceptions of what it meant. And I'm going to share with you guys just a couple of things I learned going through the process around what does it really mean and what does it not mean. So here's the definition that I will share of artificial intelligence, the branch of computer science concerned with making computers behave like humans. One of the things that I learned is that AI and machine learning are related, but they're not the same thing. I would think of AI as more of a fluid definition. So it does change. Back in the 1950s, 1960s, having a computer that could play tic-tac-toe was kind of advanced and considered artificial intelligence. I don't know that people would really think of that as artificial intelligence today. It's kind of a moving target. I think what is a more specific definition is actually machine learning, which is the field of study that gives computers the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. So you're basically taking data, and this is kind of one of the definitions that you mentioned towards the end, basically taking data and improving the performance of some sort of predictive or classification type of model. So what it doesn't mean is that it learns by itself. And I think that was a big misconception that I had. So, you can have a machine learning model that is manually refit, meaning an analyst or a data scientist goes in and takes the data that comes out of the model, manually adjusts the model, and then puts it back into production, and you can kind of continue the cycle. It is newer to have models that actually, automatically refit, and obviously place that there's a lot of excitement. but that is not actually a requirement for a machine learning product. So that was really eye-opening for me, and hopefully like demystifies a little bit of this. So again, here's just a different visual of what we really mean. So in a traditional programming approach, you take a bunch of data, you put it into your program, you have an end result. The difference with a machine learning type of model is that that data that comes out of your program is now fed back into your model to make it a better model. So you're learning from data. The model is learning from data. And one other thing I would just mention on this is, a big reason that machine learning has taken off so much in recent times is because it has become so much cheaper to store a lot of data, and computing power has improved so much. So it really increases the power that is possible with machine learning. So Carol touched on some of this before, so I'll kind of skim through this section, but there are some types of problems that are better use cases for machine learning than others. An example here is an area where you need more and more people to do the same thing at a larger scale. So for example, quality control. If you have a person that is manually listening to calls and trying to catch errors, every call that needs to be listened to is another person, or another 15 minutes of that person's time, whatever it is. So that's an area where if you can recognize patterns, you can actually drive pretty big efficiencies. Another example there, answering common questions. Those are things that if you get the same questions over and over, you can have a person manually respond to them over and over, or you can actually learn the type of answers that go to those questions and have a machine learning product be able to answer those. Others are where it's actually hard for humans to find the patterns. So where there's a lot of data, and the example I'm going to talk through, Capital One, is a little bit of both of these. But for example, if you are trying to identify customer segments, and you have tons of different data about customer segments, it may be very, very difficult for a human to actually synthesize all of those different data elements. And so that's a place where a machine learning model could help identify patterns that would be really difficult for a human to do. What are not great uses for machine learning? I really love the chart on the right-hand side here, which shows kind of like a failure mode of assuming that correlation is causation. So, over time, you have a pattern of the housing price index. You also have a pattern of babies named Ava. These things actually are not caused by the same underlying factor. They just happen to happen over the same time period. So this is like an example where, the problem you're trying to solve is unclear. And also, this is maybe not a great use case for machine learning. Other examples would be, humans can actually do the work really cost effectively. So this goes back a little bit to what Carol was saying of, if you're not going to get any benefit out of applying a machine learning model and humans are going to be even more effective, the example she talked about I think it was in the store of having the robots, that's not a great use case for machine learning. And there's some other types of examples here. A big one I do want to mention is you do have to have a clear problem that you're solving. So just because you could create some sort of modeling technique doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to solve a problem. Just like any other product or customer experience that you're delivering, you need to make sure you're really clear on what the problem is. And I'll talk about that as part of the lessons learned. As I mentioned before, machine learning does not equal self-learning. So machine learning can improve the performance of models by learning from data, but it does not mean that it does that by itself. So there's kind of like this gray area of unsupervised learning where you can take unlabeled data and have machines start, or some sort of machine learning model start learning from it. But that is not a requirement for machine learning, and is not what machine learning actually means. So I do think that's like a big takeaway, or it was for me when I started working on AI products. It does not mean you have to have this really complicated self-learning mechanism in place. Okay, So now I'm going to transition into some learnings that I had and that my team had as we built our own AI products internally at Capital One. The first thing I'm going to talk about is keeping your customer problem front and center. So this is not specific to AI, but I think in a world where you're working on AI products, you know, you can kind of get caught up in the technology and the what's possible with it, but you still need to make sure you know exactly what problem you're trying to solve and that everyone on your team knows that and keeps that in mind as you're going. So I would think of AI as another type of technology. Technology is constantly changing, as you guys know. So I would think of it as another application, but you still need to know what problem you're solving and make sure that the solution is solving that problem. And then you also want to make sure that what success looks like for you is very measurable. So if you're going to build a model, you need to make sure that you can actually measure the performance of that thing, which means not only is your problem clear, but your success metrics are very clear, and you have the data to be able to measure the success. To avoid some of the things that Carol was talking about earlier, like you definitely want to make sure that you could even observe some of these things happening and that you have the right data in place to do so. Okay. All right, so a little bit of context before I get into the example, and I will talk about this example throughout the lessons learned. So I work for Capital One. We are a financial services company, and the specific division that I work in is our auto finance division. For anyone who has purchased a car, just to give you some context on how Capital One's business works, which I think will help the product that I use as an example make sense. If you go into a dealership to buy a car, you might go in, you want to buy an SUV, you talk to a salesperson, they collect information about you, you might test drive some different vehicles. Once you decide what vehicle you want to purchase, then you'll start talking in more detail about the financing process, and you may actually meet with someone at the dealership who's called a finance manager or finance director to go through that process of financing. Capital One is a lender. There are many different auto lenders, but what's important here is that Capital One is actually interacting with the dealer, not with the consumer. So the dealer technically kind of issues that loan to you and then gets a lender on the back end to purchase the loan. If you guys need clarification on any of this, please stop me. I don't want to go too detailed, but make sure you guys have enough context to understand it. So once this happens, the dealership is actually interacting with different lenders. The dealership, is interacting with different lenders and associates at those lenders. Capital One, we call these associates relationship managers. You can think of them as underwriters. So they basically can adjust the terms of the loan to make sure that it's within our Capital One's credit policy, but it also meets the specific needs of the dealer and the end consumer. And there can be a bunch of back and forth. So the consumer might want to add a warranty on, and maybe they don't have enough income to be able to afford the monthly payment that it would take to add a warranty onto that car. And so the dealer may negotiate back and forth with the lenders to try to get to a deal structure that works for everyone involved. So that process of negotiation is where this example that I'm going to share comes into play. Hopefully that makes sense. Stop me if not.
No questions yet, but I can also answer questions in the chat because I work in the same business. So hopefully we can clear anything up for y'all.
Awesome. So relationship managers, these associates at Capital One in this example, they get tons of applications that come in from different lenders or from different dealers. And a dealer might submit an application to 5 different lenders. So we don't get all the business that comes to us in the form of applications. The relationship managers will only work on a small portion of the deals that come in. And so they'll try to choose deals that they think we can actually win. This is a very judgmental process. So the RMs a lot of times have, a decade of experience. They kind of know this dealer prefers this type of deal structures. They might know that, based on the terms here, we don't know what other lenders' offers are, but we feel like we're probably pretty competitive on this. This is a brand new application. So they're probably looking for a really quick response. If I can get on it quickly, I might be able to win the deal. So it's this really judgmental and experience-based process of choosing which deals to work. our relationship managers only work on about 20% of deals, of applications that come in. So they really need to be like choosy in which ones they want to work on. So this is kind of the problem so that we were originally faced with in this example. So we did a bunch of research with our internal relationship managers to try to understand this problem in more detail. Some of the things we learned, and we did a bunch of different types of research, not all of them were at this phase of the product, but we learned, you know, they are relying too much on judgment. There's a lot of like, I think this one's better. I have a gut feeling about this one. Based on my experience, I think I would go here or there. It's very judgmental. And there's no way for them to really know how effective that their judgment is being. So they don't even have data to say, hey, your judgment like really worked and here's why. There's also a lot of data. So, you know, a deal structure that comes in may have 300 or more different variables associated with the deal structure. There's no way that the relationship managers are able to review all of that information for all of the deals that come to them. Similarly, you know, they're looking at customers' credit reports, all this different information that cannot be synthesized in a, you know, time-sensitive type of manner by a human. And they spend way too much time reacting. So dealers are calling them, they're trying to get quick responses back to them. They don't have enough time to be on the offense and be really strategic because they don't have the right tools and information to do so. So we try to get really clear on a problem statement. You can kind of see at the bottom, this is like the problem statement that we narrowed in on. So they try to win as much business as they possibly can. And by the way, their compensation plan is directly tied to how much business they're able to win. But they don't know how effective they are or how to become more effective. So this is kind of at a high level, the key insights that we got out of the research. The next thing I'll talk about, and I'll continue to reference that example as we go through, is about building the right team. So I would say more than any other product or project I've worked on, having the right cross-functional team when working on an AI product is so important. If you don't have any one of these roles, your product cannot be successful, at least the product that we worked on. So, you know, your data scientist is actually the one building the model. They are bringing the expertise about different modeling techniques and actually like building the core machine learning model. We also have an analyst. So for us, our analyst is basically helping to define the opportunity. What does success look like? Handling all of our internal credit governance and other processes, securing the right approvals, measuring that success, making sure that we aren't causing any unintentional biases, and making sure we have the right infrastructure to measure those things and to define them up front. Then we have our product manager, who is defining the customer experience in partnership with the designer. They're running the team, essentially, coming up with the intent for how this product and experience is going to work, and kind of acting at that intersection point between the customer experience, the technology we're building, and the business outcomes. You have your designers, who are key in making sure that we are designing and building an experience that solves the problem that we set out to solve, and that also is usable and intuitive to the user. There can be a lot of complexity. I'll talk a little bit more about this in one of the other lessons learned in defining a product that is usable and understandable, but also gets the data-driven learnings needed. And then obviously you have your technology team, your engineers, who are actually building the thing. So super important. I can't emphasize this one enough. Make sure you have all the right folks in the room. So here's kind of an example for the project that we worked on. You know, a couple others that I did not mention before, but that were really important for us were our legal and compliance partners. You know, I work for a large organization, and there are a lot of different regulations that we need to adhere to and different internal governance channels, and they're really critical partners. as well as our sales team. So I'll talk more about that in a future slide. Okay, so this one I think is really important for any product as well as AI. So this is about, I'm calling it like validate your ship sinkers fast and early. So what are the things that could go wrong? Kind of your Black Mirror concept. Like if you were to do a retrospective of your product, you know, before you start working on it, if it didn't go well, like what are the reasons that it might not go well? What are the things that are like keeping you up at night that you're thinking about? I just don't know about this one thing. Like what are those risks? And so it's really important to think as a team, because everyone on your team will have a different perspective and be able to highlight different types of risks you might not be thinking about. But figuring those out up front and then figuring out quickly, how do you turn those risky, like unknown things into risks, but that are known for you, and make sure that you do that as early as possible in your product journey. At this phase, I would definitely, you know, without causing any customer or associate harm, be as scrappy and like fast as possible to validate these things so that you can get those out of the way and focus on like making your product as amazing as it can be. So the example that you see here on the left-hand side, one of the folks on my team actually used this an example in an internal talk that we did, and I thought it was awesome. So what you see here is actually a laser pointer. So before eBay was eBay, the founder of eBay had a big unknown as he was dreaming up this idea of selling different, you know, used products online. And one of the big unknowns was like, would people actually shop for these items online, right, without seeing them? And so he tested through this site called Auction Web. He basically put this one product online. He waited a week, got someone to buy it, and used this like kind of scrappy process. He did it in a weekend, like created the website in a weekend, put the pen up there, and then was able to get someone to buy it within a week. And so it basically validated for him really quickly that this like online shopping before seeing type of experience could actually work. So I would just say like figure out what are the things that you're worried about, the things that could go wrong, and make sure you have appropriate tests as quickly as possible to validate those. The worst thing is to build out a huge product and then figure out that, you know, some critical enabler is not possible. And then you're that much further along and, you know, aren't able to use all of the great work that you've done. So in the case of Smart Cues, the product that my team worked on, these were three of the big unknowns that we had identified up front. So one was, you know, can a model accurately predict whether or not we can win a deal? Is that even possible? The second was, will AI be able to win more business than a RM? While, you know, I was talking earlier about how RMs have judgment and all this experience, like really wouldn't underestimate that. There's a lot of information, especially when it comes to like interpersonal relationships, that these, you know, awesome salespeople have gained from working with their dealerships for so long. And so can we actually create some sort of AI product that can win more business than they can by applying that judgment? And then lastly, this is more from a design perspective, like will users be able to understand and trust this product? The trust part is really important, you know, especially in the case where you're building an AI product that could be perceived as a potential threat to people's jobs. Building the trust and like making people want to use the product is really important. So this was something we were really cognizant of from the beginning. Okay. So this is an example of what the product looked like. Obviously, we've blurred out any sensitive information, but if you were a relationship manager at Capital One and you pull up your list of applications, you're going to basically see this list. There's a bunch of filters and other things that you can use to narrow down your list. But this is where we implemented the AI product called Smart Cues. And when we first did it, we had already built out this experience that you see here. It was just kind of a no logic, just a basic cue ordered by the first application that came in. And so we already had this infrastructure in place. So we tried to repurpose as much as we could early on in order to get the test out as quickly as possible. So, we really wanted to reduce any sort of tech investment until we felt like we had really validated the value of the concept. So some of the things you can see on here, like we reused existing features that were already live in the product. We basically asked users to do some scrappy, manual logging of data when they made outbound phone calls on these applications so that we could measure the success of the product before we had built out any sort of systematic way of naturally capturing that data. And we really just wanted to get this product into market as quickly as possible to start doing some of the validations. So we basically just ordered this queue based on the score of the model and put it out with some training to associates to help us get those learnings. There was one thing I'll just call it on the slide that was an area we did not skip in the interest of speed, although we did do it in a more condensed fashion. So one of the things that is really important in the auto finance business is that lenders give offers to dealers really fast. If you think about, your experience, if you've bought a car through a dealership, you don't want to have to wait there for hours trying to figure out your financing, right? Or have to come back later. You want to be able to do that quickly. And so if a customer is sitting in the store, the dealer needs to get that offer, purchased by a lender in real time, really, really fast. And so one of the big constraints that we did have was we needed to make sure that this thing was updated in real time or very close to real time. If it was hours later that we were manually updating this queue of deals, that's going to be too late. So we did invest in having a connection to the database so that we could get that data in almost real time. We did take some shortcuts. We did not build it out in our target architecture from a technology perspective. We did it as quickly as we could, but we did make sure that that constraint was cared for. Later on, I won't go into all of these details, but we did, after more rounds of research and testing, we did make changes to improve the design and to improve the user experience while still allowing us to capture the data. So one of the things I'll call out here is you can kind of see where it says smart cues and there's an on and off toggle at the top. At first, when we launched this, we didn't have a toggle and we just basically forced all the users to use smart cues all the time because their queue was just updated by it. While this did give us, kind of clean data, it was not a great user experience because the relationship managers do have a lot of information in their heads and, based on the relationships that they have built over years with their dealer partners, that they do need to be able to apply on top of the model. So we think about it more as augmenting their intelligence as opposed to complete artificial intelligence. We gave them this toggle so that they can actually, as it makes sense for them, apply their own judgment. The RMs love the product. It helps them a lot. We see them using the toggle about 93% of the time. And so, it's really those cases where they need to, for whatever reason, apply information not captured or, able to be captured by the model, then they're turning this thing off. So we did miss one big unknown early on. And I'm curious if anyone can guess what it was. So if you guys have any guesses, please enter them in the chat.
So one question was, were the relationship managers initially resistant? Racial bias in auto lending is another one. Any other guesses? Any other missed unknowns? Y'all are quiet tonight. All right, Amanda, what was it?
Okay, so we actually didn't think about, does someone have a question? So will users have the time to use the product? This seems like such an obvious thing, but our associates have so many tasks that are on their plate that actually calling dealers on applications is only a relatively small portion of their day. What we saw happen around the same time that we launched the product was a good problem for Capital One, but our volume started really taking off. And as a result, we the relationship managers were needing to help out our funding team with a bunch of applications that had come through, but were needing help to kind of get all the way through the process of being fully funded and paid out to dealerships. And so what happened at the same time was like they were getting pulled to work on other stuff. So this was something that was so obvious, we didn't even really think about it as a risk upfront because it hadn't been a problem before, but it did become an issue for us. So, we worked on a few different initiatives, including hiring a lot more funders to help take that workload, appropriately off of the RM's plates. But this was something that kind of came out of left field for us, but did impact the product. So I would just say, like, I wouldn't count any sort of unknowns as too silly or like too basic, because even some of those seemingly obvious things could go wrong. So I would really like just push yourself to think about, doing that postmortem up front. What are the things that could go wrong where your product might not be as successful as you want it to be? Okay. I have just a couple more to talk through. This one I think is really relevant to this audience. So balancing user experience and data needs. You need to have data in order to have a high performing model. That is just, by definition, what is required to develop a machine learning model. You need to either have the right data or get the right data in order to build the model. And you must be able to validate the success of the model. So making sure that you have the right infrastructure in place, and this is where I would rely really heavily on your data science partners, is really, really important. You also need to have a great user experience. Your customers have to use the product or it's not going to add any value. So my advice would be define what is good enough. You don't need to have the 100% version of either of these things, especially early on. But what is good enough for you to get the learnings that you need to get at each stage on your journey? So I would not sacrifice on the good enough. If you need, to see that your product is being used at least 50% of the time, or whatever your good enough definition is, like understand what that thing is and make sure you meet that bar. But this is like really hard for, I feel like, product people, designers in general, like, don't feel like you have to get the 100% of everything right away. You might not, and it actually might be the better outcome early on. So my advice would be to make sure for both the data gathering as well as the user experience, you get that good enough bar, meet that bar, get feedback quickly, and then know that you're going to improve it over time. This is just version 1.
Okay.
Designing for reuse, this is especially important in large companies or for a product that, maybe will be reused by other companies or made publicly available. But from a technology and design perspective, like, think about how you can build in a modular way. One of the reasons that we were able to get testing in market so quickly with the product that we built was because we had already built this very modular platform that the relationship managers were working out of every day to do their jobs. So it was very easy for us to plug in a new component. As well as from a design perspective, like, we have an enterprise-wide design system that we use. And so, we could create new products, integrate them within older products, and still deliver like visually a cohesive experience. So I won't go into this in too much detail, but this is just something that is, I think, important to think about, and also think about other teams or other users who might benefit from using your product, and designing them in a way that can be, broken down into little like Lego blocks and plugged into other experiences for different users. Okay, the last kind of tip that I have here is around selling the benefit. So this goes back to what I was mentioning before about, when you're building, especially products that could be perceived as replacing or streamlining people's jobs, like there's going to be a lot of angst about that, understandably so. And what we learned was it's really, really important to sell the benefit. If you can explain clearly and measurably why something is helping someone be more effective and helping them actually be better at their job, they're going to want to use the product. If it is about, hey, here's how much of your job is going away because this product is doing such a good job of doing what you were doing before, like they're not going to want to use that thing. That's really obviously like instills fear and is like scary for people who that's their job. So, a couple of examples here where you don't want to talk about the features. People don't want to use something because it has certain features. They want to use it because it's delivering value and benefit to them. In the example of the iPod here, like a 5 gig hard drive and a 4x2 inch case, like, okay, those are the features that make the thing possible. But what someone might really care about is you now have 100 or 1,000 songs in your pocket. This was back in the day, the vision for this product. So really think about how you can position your product in a way that makes people want to use it and be really proactive in selling it. Okay. Here's some examples of things we did internally. We have all these different centers across the US where these relationship managers are. We kind of turned it into launch parties for them. We made sure they had reporting as well as regular communications from us and from their management about the value they were getting out of the product and how it was helping them to win more business. The focus really was not on like, here's how much we're streamlining your job. It was on, hey, look at how much more effective each person is able to be by using this product that helps them to, capture even more business for Capital One. So I definitely encourage you, especially when it is something that is an associate-facing tool or, geared towards mimicking human tasks, that you keep in mind the value for that person when you're talking about the product benefits. Okay, I have a short video I was going to play that is from our users' perspective, so you guys can just kind of hear a little bit of the story of the product. The amazing designer who actually designed this experience is the person you see talking in here. So I will go ahead and play it. Lauren, let me know if you guys can't hear it, but hopefully it will come through okay.
Sounds good.
We've created smart cues to utilize the power of augmented intelligence within our relationship manager family. Our goal is to enable our RMs to work smarter and not harder. Time that used to be spent hand-picking applications to work is now spent calling more dealers and working more deals to win more deals for Capital One.
It takes all the guesswork out of like, oh, what deal should I call? Should I call on that one? Should I not call on that one? Should I call on that one? Should I? And all that guesswork is gone. It's picking some really good deals to put in that smart queue. So it seems pretty dang smart.
In this business, you need to hustle. That helps you hustle at the highest level. In the old days, I hate to say it, but you had to guess. And you had to hope that the callback was decent.
Before we had Smart Queue, it was tough to decide which ones we were going to call on because we didn't know what our likelihood of getting it was. Now with Smart Queue, it makes it a little bit easier, especially to make outbound calls. Your likelihood of getting that deal is higher.
I can spend all day in CLO trying to basically counter all of the deals myself just based on my experience, whereas in Smart Queues, instead of me wasting all of my time in CLO trying to figure out a way to go on one deal, they've already teed up multiple applications.
Rebel is putting me in a position to call effectively to deals that the algorithm is saying are captured. It's certainly increased my productivity. I love being a problem solver. And so Smart Queues and Rebel let me be a problem solver to my dealers.
Smart Cues determines which applications are most likely to fund, and therefore which applications our RMs should call on. Because our RMs are only able to proactively touch 8% of the approved applications that come in, we want to make sure that those 8% are the best 8%.
So just a quick recap, then we can go into Q&A. These are kind of my key lessons learned from working on this product. Like I said, keep your customer problem front and center. Make sure you have the right team. Be really, really thoughtful about that upfront and advocate for it if you don't think you do have the right team. Understand what those ship sinkers or like big risky things are that you need to learn quickly, and do so as fast as you can. The next one, be thoughtful about making sure you're balancing your user experience and your data needs. Both are so important, but don't be overly obsessed about them being perfect from day one. If you are designing a product that may have other use cases or may integrate with other systems at some point in time, think about how you can design and build for reuse. And then finally, make sure you're selling the benefit of the product, not the specific features, not the model, but how that thing is helping your customers and your users to become, even more effective in their jobs. So that's everything I had. Happy to take any questions you guys might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. We got a couple comments in there about missing seeing people in person in the office. So it was cool to see that video. Thank you. So one of the questions that came through is early on, how did you know that RMs weren't already doing good enough? Like, how did you notice that this was a problem worth solving with machine learning?
Yeah, so I will say Capital One is a very data-driven company from like its inception. So there's a lot of ongoing analytics about how all of the different business processes and teams are performing. And so, we are able to compare different metrics around how many apps are they actually touching. You heard Tom say in that video, like they only proactively, meaning reaching out to dealers, are able to do that on 8% of applications. They get another 12% that dealers call us on, but they're not touching most of the deals. So we knew inherently like that could be an opportunity space. And then we could also look at data such as like how effective in terms of converting into an actual loan with us are those different populations of deals. And there's pretty significant differences in, we call it cash out, but basically what percentage of those applications are going to turn into funded loans with Capital One. So I would say that was one thing. And then also just talking to the users. I mean, you heard them say in the video, like they know that it's a judgmental thing. They're working so fast. They are trying to do the best that they possibly can. But they will be the first ones to tell you, like, I'm trying to do my best at this, but I don't have 10 minutes to spend trying to analyze all the deals before I pick one to call on. So I think it's a combination of like having the quantitative insights, but also making sure you understand from users' perspective, like what's really going on. And then from there, we kind of did more analytics to better ground what we thought the opportunity size was.
Awesome. And I know you kind of took us through an awesome case study and from start to beginning. And there was a question in the chat about, how different was your model used at the early validation phases to kind of like the more mature model that it is now? Basically, like, are there low fidelity models akin to low fidelity wireframes?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. And I think like something we probably don't always think of as much in low fidelity, but that it should totally be thought of in the same way. So not on this project, but I will say there's another product my team is working on now that we actually made a decision. We are calling it Smart Structure, and it's basically like picks up where Smart Queues left off. So once you decide what deal you want to work on, this new product will basically recommend deal structures that we think are likely to work out for the dealer, for the customer, for Capital One. And we actually spent a lot of time, and I thought it was like really bold recommendation on our data science partners side that they're not recommending building a model for the first versions of this. They're kind of doing more of a logic-based optimizer based on like the problem that we're trying to solve, the data we have available, and helping to get like quick in-market learnings. So definitely, like, I think across the board, think about how you can get those quick, scrappy learnings without taking shortcuts that you shouldn't take. So I tried to give an example of that earlier, where we did have constraint about needing close to real-time data to build the model. So, or to build the product, sorry. So just like, yes, push on the modeling aspect as well as the design, as well as the data, as well as the user experience, like the technology, all of those things can be done in different levels of fidelity. I think that's also why it's really important to have that diverse team, because like one person could not make the appropriate judgment calls across all those different dimensions. Like you really need to have the folks in the room who are the experts in those different areas and can help you think through the pros and cons and options. But yeah, that's awesome. A really, really good question.
Yeah, I love that you and Carol both kind of touched on the diversity needs in the teams. That is such an important aspect, and to see it kind of come to light in both your talks tonight was awesome. So another question related to kind of the user experience that you mentioned was, were the relationship managers initially resistant, and how did you, what did you need to work around that, even maybe before your big launch parties like you had talked about?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the term resistant. I would use the term skeptical. I think they were more like unsure about the thing. We also made, I didn't talk about this in the presentation, but we also made a decision early on when we were doing testing from a data perspective that I think actually compromised the user experience probably a little more than we would have done if we did it over again. But in order to get the model performing as well as we wanted it to, we needed to get data on what happens if there's really good deals that they don't call on. Because today, like, even though it's judgment based, they generally know what applications are the low hanging fruit. And so we actually randomized some associates queues of applications in order to get data kind of across the spectrum of high to low probability of being like worked and not worked. It did help us from a data perspective. It also really eroded user trust in the like specific teams where we did that. Understandably, to be honest, some of them still like the product. And so we were like, well, some of this maybe is a little bit just like, it's helping them go faster, even it's taking away some of that time of analyzing. But yeah, I think that in that case, like we probably, had we gone back, wouldn't do that thing again. But it was, just another lesson learned.
Yeah. So speaking about, what you would have done differently, there was a question about, now knowing what you know about the missed unknown, right? Like, do they have time to do it? What do you think you could have done differently from a data or research perspective to uncover that thing the next time?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think some of it, I don't know if we could have like fully anticipated it because some of those changes were happening at the same time that we were rolling out the product. I do think like making sure our monitoring is comprehensive of like not just first order, but also more like second and third order types of things could help. So I would say like we knew that some of the funding issues of having higher volumes was a pain point. We didn't know that it was going to get a lot worse. Had we gone back, I think, and been more deliberate, maybe from a process perspective of like setting specific guardrails where like if we don't get a certain amount of their time using the product, we can escalate to our process teams and start figuring out like, how do we shift some of their other responsibilities across the teams? Yeah, it's a tough question. Another thing we could have done was like not build this product and focus on building some other thing that helped them with, a thing they were spending more time on. So there are probably lots of different options that we could have done. It was like a tough one for us.
Yeah. I love that you brought up too, like, the option wasn't just to uncover the unknown. It was to like, look at some other problem and prioritize that too. Like, and we won't know what the outcome would be. So a question in the chat about what was your timeline for this project? And do you notice any difference in the timeline than other products that you may have developed in the past?
Yeah, so there were different iterations. The very first version of it, we got out really fast. I think it took us about a month to get the first test out, which was like, I don't know about every company, but for Capital One, that's like pretty fast to get a product out. It was really scrappy. I shouldn't say that. We started working on the model before that. I don't remember exactly how long, but by the time we started getting a model that we felt pretty good about, it was about a month that we had the thing like live. We did pick like small teams of associates to test it with early on. But the overall product had a really long life cycle because we did a lot of different rounds of testing and iteration. I mentioned we did that like randomization test. We did kind of a first version of the model test. We over time did improve the user experience and design. We also improved the underlying technology, the model itself. Like there were multiple iterations, and I think we'll continue iterating on it. We have like actually a couple of a next level idea that we're playing around it with is let's not just score the applications based on how likely we think they are to be won, but like the incremental impact that an associate can have above and beyond no associate, because some of the deals like we might win even if nobody calls on it. And so we're kind of continuing to iterate on it. I think it will be a journey until we're kind of at a point where the next round of iteration isn't worth the expected like improvement in value.
Awesome. So I'll now ask a question for both Amanda and Carol. As I think both of you kind of mentioned, like, you know, understand what outcomes you're trying to drive, and curious, like, what advice you might give to the group on defining those success criteria.
Success criteria for any AI system? Yeah. Okay.
I think so. Sure.
Yeah, that's hard. So it's really going to be context dependent. It's dependent on so many other factors. Accuracy, speed, relevance. There are a lot of different ways to measure quality, just as there is in any other user experience. So the basics of UX, of course, using heuristics and using those kinds of methods to determine quality from a user experience perspective, but also is there trust of the system? As Amanda talked about that trust a bit, if people don't trust it, they're not going to use it, then there's low acceptance. Thinking about the understandability. Do they really understand what data the system's using, how the system is analyzing and looking at the data, how it's putting together the recommendations it's making? Do they trust the recommendations or the information that's being provided by the system? And is there that indication of transparency, just that they understand when the system is working, when it's not, when it's acting properly, when it's not, that sort of thing. That there are just a lot of different variables there.
Yeah. And Amanda, how did you land on your success criteria for your Smart Cues project?
Yeah. So we thought about success in a couple different ways. So one is like, I think the most important thing is like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Like for us, the problem was the relationship managers are working super judgmentally. We don't know how effective they don't know how effective their strategy is and know it could be more effective. And so we tried to think through like, what is the best way we can measure like the most solving that most important problem? And we kind of think of that as like our customer benefit or customer success metrics. And if that thing isn't true, then like, what's the point of the product? So I think getting really clear on the problem through qualitative and quantitative methods is step number one. And then coming up with the best metric or metrics that you can to measure you actually solving that problem. You might not have the data to measure the perfect metric. So what's your best like proxy metric, or can you get the data? Can you capture that data in a different way? So I think like the customer success metrics, really important. Also, if you are working for, a for-profit company, how does this actually improve your business? There may be certain products you might invest in just for the sake of customer benefit, but like typically you also want to be doing that in an area that makes sense for the business. And so making sure you can understand the impact to the economics of the business is really important. And then I think like the third area I would think about is like almost like your must-have sort of metrics, like what are your baseline metrics that you need to watch out for? I wouldn't call them your like metrics for success, but like they're your enablers. So this would be things like, how is your technology meeting the appropriate performance metrics? Are you not violating any regulations? Are you, not having certain amounts of downtime, or whatever your bar is for like the thing is working and not causing problems? Like you need to have those as well as your model, meeting model expectations. Are you not causing any, in our case, like credit risk negative impacts? And so there's like a bunch of different sort of foundational metrics. But when I was talking about success metrics, I was really talking about like the customer, like solving the problem that you're trying to solve. At the end of the day, like the other stuff is secondary, maybe with the exception of business value, but like the customer and business problem are really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you guys for staying on and answering questions. We had a bunch of great questions come in even in the past few minutes. And just so everybody knows, we're going to make this recording and the slides available on our website and on our YouTube. We'll also make the chat transcript available too. And if you've shared your information in the LinkedIn spreadsheet, connect with each other. Like everyone here is interested in AI and learning more about and from each other. And so connect with each other, ask each other questions, and definitely connect with our two lovely speakers tonight. Your talks were wonderful. Thank you so much for spending the evening with us. And with that, oh yes, make sure we clap, thank you. With that, we would love to get to our networking portion. Carol and Amanda, feel free to stay or drop if you need to. But we always want to make sure that we're enabling connections between the community. If you are not into networking, you can drop now, but you never know where you're going to get your next job from. So meeting people from all across the world is super, super awesome here. So Jen is now going to put up some our prompts. And so if you'd like to get out now, so we don't try to put you in a room and you leave others stranded. And so what we're going to do is put you in breakout rooms with a couple of other people. Do your normal introductions of what is your specialty, design, research, strategy, product, other. And for the first room, we'll have a prompt for everybody to get you talking. So it is, if you could learn any skill, non-UX related, what would that be and why? So that's the first topic. And then we'll bring you back in together in a couple minutes and then put you back into new rooms to talk about the second topic. So if you aren't going to stick around, please fill out this follow-up survey that I'll send out after the event is over. And if you are going to stick around, I will see you in a breakout room in just a minute. And thank you everybody for joining.
All right, I will take it over from here. Again, thank you all for sticking around and joining the breakout rooms. This is the fun part. This is where we get to meet people and really connect with our community. And I encourage you to stay because you never know who you're going to meet. So I'm going to throw us into breakout rooms. Make sure you hit join the breakout rooms so that Zoom does not do that automatically. So you need to do that for yourself. And I'm going to put you in there and we'll be in there for about 10 minutes. Again, it's tell us who you are, your specialty, and if you can learn any non-UX related skill, what would that be? So let's go.